On today's Business Insights podcast, I'm pleased to be joined by Jill Bristow and Kelly Byrne to discuss Resilient, the third and final update in a series of Cardiff Capital Region State of the Nation reports. Welcome, ladies.
Hello. Hi, Mark.
Would you mind providing our listeners with a brief introduction to yourselves and your role specifically within the Cardiff Capital Region, please?
Okay, I'll go first if that's okay. So I'm Kelly Byrne and I'm Director of Cardiff Capital Region and its £1.4 billion city deal. So my role is to really bring about and coordinate a whole region approach to uplifting our economy and understanding the specific problems and challenges that we need to address and respond to. So our work is guided by four main targets, that is to uplift GVA, i.e. productivity in the region, to create around 25,000 jobs, to leverage about 4 billion in private investment, but to make sure that we build and grow the economy in sustainable, resilient and inclusive ways.
Hi, I'm Jill Bristow. I'm Professor of Economic Geography at Cardiff University, where I specialise, I suppose, in city and regional economic development. I've worked recently with colleagues in the university on pulling together the data for these State of the Region reports, and we'll say a little bit more about what those reports do in a moment.
Resilience is the theme of the third report that's about to be released to the public. Before we discuss some of the detail in the report, Jill, can you remind our listeners why this series of reports was commissioned in the first place, and what's the overriding objective of this third report?
So these reports were commissioned to provide the city region with a really good sense of the economic, social and environmental health of the wider city region. So they're designed to pull together the range of different indicators that we have about how the city region is performing, how its different communities are doing in relation to a range of different economic, social and environmental objectives. So it really gives us a good way of benchmarking the performance of the city region, the health, if you like, of the economy, and enabling us to see and track how well the city deal and its investments are doing in terms of improving the economy and meeting its objectives. The third report is focused on resilience, which is really about how well equipped the region is to adapt to the range of different shocks and change that are affecting the economy in particular. So it really gives some indication of our preparedness, if you like, for different shocks and our ability to cope with change.
Resilience is one of the three pillars of the Economic and Industrial Growth Plan. Kelly, can you explain to our audience why resilience is such an important factor within the Cardiff Capital Region growth plans?
Yeah, for me, it is the really important factor. And I always think that we don't have one economy in the Cardiff Capital Region. I think we've got lots of different economies. We've got the tradable economy. We've got the more family localised foundational economy. We've got the corporate economy. And I think all of these things interact and they interface. And for me, the interface of these different economies is the really, really interesting bit. And I think if you think about the Cardiff Capital Region, the 10 local authorities, we've got some of the most competitive places, the highest productivity. If you look at the UK competitiveness index, we've got some of the, the fastest growing places, cheek by jowl, with some of the least competitive and least productive places. And I think, that presents quite, a stark contrast. So unless we have resilience, unless we have a way of embedding benefits, of making sure things that are recycled and recirculated, they come back into local economies, they draw upon local skills, resources and assets, we may have growth, but my fear is that growth could be quite superficial. And if we're really going to make a difference and we're going to move the needle on the issues that are really important in the Cardiff Capital Region, quality of life, well-being, wellness, the ability of people to participate, to feel like they have a say, then resilience is the really important factor to me in ensuring all of that.
Let's talk about population demographics in particular, one of the key indicators of resilience. Jill, what's the Cardiff Capital Region trend data in this report telling us?
I think it's really showing two things. It's showing that generally the population is ageing. So we've got to be really mindful of the growth in the population that's aged over 65. And the implications of that are in particular, I suppose, for greater demands on public services in particular places. But secondly, I think it's showing that there's quite a lot of diversity in population dynamics and trends through the city region. And one of the key themes through this report, and indeed through the 3 reports as a whole, is that we really need to be tracking, monitoring, understanding the different patterns and trends that are going on across the wider city region. So the growth in, say, for example, the over 65s may be more of a problem in certain areas in the city region, whereas in other parts of the city region, we've got a young population. We know, for example, that Cardiff benefits, of course, through the universities and the attraction in of young people. So there are different dynamics going on in Cardiff and the city in a sense. So I think it really gives us a sense of the richness and the diversity of population trends going on across the city region.
And Kelly, what challenges does that present to the region? What steps are being put in place to start addressing some of these challenges?
Well, I think, Mark, the really important thing for me, and I always ask myself questions of purpose. So when I came into this role, I think everybody talks a great game around growth, and growth is the name of the game, isn't it? That's what we've got to do. We've got to try to increase everything, GVA, productivity. And I always think to myself, to what end? And I think for me, it's got to be about resilience. It's got to be about the ability of our economy to withstand shocks. And I've seen growth strategies the world over, which are so focused on growth in isolation, they just exacerbate inequality in other areas. So I think we've got to be really careful with how we use and apply these terms. We can't all win at the same race. So I think for me, this concept of, what is true sustainability and resilience is really, really key. So I think for us, I think the starting point in terms of how we respond to this is what are the things that we can do that genuinely have an impact region-wide. Now, I don't just mean, can we do something in all 10 areas? Can everybody just have a slice of the cake? Because I think that's a really simplistic way of looking at it. But I definitely think there are things that we can do through supply chains, through building SME clusters, through thinking about the wider ecosystem, thinking about skills, and making sure that we do more than just trickle down economics. Because I think the key thing for us in the Cardiff Capital Region is we don't have a massive population compared to other regions in the UK. So this thing around agglomeration economics, where if you just invest in the biggest places and everybody feels the trickle-down benefits, I don't see that as being the case in the Cardiff Capital Region, and our politicians don't. So I think for us, it's about when we do something, how deep do we go in? Do we think about how benefits are recirculated into local economies, how they're being recycled, how we're making best use of local skills? So one of the things, just to give you a very quick example that we're doing at the moment around our house investment fund, is called Homes for All the Region. And when we looked at the problem we could best respond to in the Cardiff Capital Region, the evidence base told us that was around unviable stalled sites that have been sat around for a long, long time. And the other one was, the lack of facilitation around SMEs in the market. SMEs can't access some of the, the financing packages, some of the support that they need to be able to go into communities and solve these problems. But in doing so, create these wider benefits, that make sure that at a community level, these contributions are made and felt. So I don't think it's going in with the same old responses and doing more of what we've done. I think it's taken a much more considered and careful approach. And I think a lot of the work that Jill and the university has done has given us the insights and the intelligence to be able to focus in that much deeper and more meaningful way.
The report indicates that we have significant variations in economic vulnerability across the region, with wage levels in particular and debt statistics used as indicators. Jill, why is this important as a region? How do we start to collectively tackle this inequality?
Well, I think it's really important that we if we're looking seriously at being a resilient city region, that to understand what makes us resilient is important. And it really influences the kinds of data that we need to collect to understand that. So it means that we need to look at our strengths. Where have we got, growing economic sectors, growing businesses, growing opportunities? But it also really means that we need to understand our risks, our vulnerabilities, where we might be vulnerable to a particular shock or a change. And so looking at things like household debt, for example, is a really good indicator of where we might be vulnerable. if you think of your own household, when there's any kind of shock to the finances, the household finances, it's really important that you have a buffer, that you have perhaps some savings or some sort of resource that you can draw upon to help you through any particular shock or change. And we can apply that then to the whole economy, to the whole city region. We need to really understand, where are our buffers, where have we got perhaps some resources that we can draw upon if we need to, if there's a shock that we need to cope with. So looking at data like household debt and wage levels is a really good indicator of where we may be vulnerable. And I think, as Kelly says, one of the key challenges really facing the city region is inequality in the distribution of wealth and opportunity and prosperity. And I think this report is really helpful in starting to bring together sort of a range of different indicators that paint a full picture of the scale of that inequality and the challenge that we have, and hopefully then give a really good benchmark for the city deal to tackle and improve upon that.
And Mark, why I think what Jill has said is so important is all of the narrative that we're hearing today from UK government is about levelling up. Just this week, Lord Kerslake finalised and published his report, which was the UK 2070 Commission, which was looking at regional inequality across the whole of the UK. And, you know, some really, again, stark findings and recommendations in that report. So if levelling up is to be meaningful to places like the Cardiff Capital Region, not only do we have to have a compelling evidence base in the face of that, you know, to make sure that we can target and we can focus, but we've got to have some really big, ambitious, transformative ideas as well in terms of how we go about that. You know, it can't just be a narrative. We've got to be able to back it up with the goods. So when I talk about sort of really moving the needle, yes, the evidence and the data is really important. But for us, it's been the conversion of those things into the frameworks, the processes, you know, the procedures that will allow us to really make a reality of all those things that Jill has been talking about.
Kelly, from a Cardiff Capital Region City Deal perspective, how can you make sure that the programmes and projects we invest in are playing a full part, I guess, in addressing the variations that we've identified?
So one of the things that we've done, based on the evidence base that Jill and colleagues have provided, and via our regional economic growth partnership, taking a very strong political lead from our regional cabinet, is we've put something in place, you know, which sounds very high level and vague. It's called an investment and intervention framework. So this doesn't just guide our investments in sectors and deals. It guides our investments in terms of place and where we really need to focus these interventions. So it balances the what and the where. And what that's telling us is that rather than loads of one-off projects, which we could be investing in and doing okay, we need to go deeper than that. We need to go into clusters. We need to do far fewer things than we've done before, because we need that absolute granularity of focus. So we've said, and the evidence base shows, that things like, you know, advanced compound semiconductors could be globally significant for us. So rather than just one investment in one company, it's how do we grow the supply chain? How do we bring together a cluster approach? How do we create the connections, the landing spaces, the inward investment opportunities, the skills growth, the centres, all of those things that are key to making that a reality. MedTech is really important to us. You know, we say that we're good at life sciences. What we're really good at in the Cardiff Capital Region is medical devices and diagnostics. So again, we've engaged with a whole sector, about 200 businesses. We've made another submission to the UK Research and Innovation on their Strength in Places Fund to try and put in place the conditions that we need to grow that, not just with the big anchor companies, but with the smaller supply chain companies, with the SMEs that are right across the whole of the region, showing incredible resilience and innovation. And the question is one of, how do we support all of those businesses, you know, to be the best they can be and to realise their potential? We've said InsurTech is really important to us. And again, we could be globally comparable in that industry. So again, we've backed another bid to UK government about how we put in place the environments and the conditions that sector needs to grow. We know the creative industries are really important to us. We've got a huge opportunity around production and stage and screen. We've had, you know, loads of stuff that's live on Netflix now that's been filmed in the Cardiff Capital Region. but they struggle in terms of recruitment, getting people with the right skill set, retaining them, making sure there's opportunities for the graduates that we're spinning out. So what we're trying to do really is to think about the opportunities that we have, and then thinking about stretch, thinking about the assets that we have, thinking about the skills that we need to grow. And I think there's real synergies across all of these clusters and sectors. And I think for me, the holy grail would look like, sort of one big combined picture, which allows us to pull upon, to share upon those strengths, to understand the interfaces. I get that that's a long way off, but this feels like really important work. And it feels like the stuff that could make a difference in the long term.
Gender equality isn't one of the measures we've had the opportunity to report on so far. Jill, in your opinion, do you think we should be doing more as a region and indeed as a nation to promote the role that women could play across, I guess, all sectors of the economy?
Absolutely. I think it's something like International Women's Day is a great opportunity, and it shines a light, I think, on the role that women play across all areas of life. And I think it really usefully connects to the idea of resilience to think about diversity. Diversity is a critical strength for resilience. So if we're thinking about a resilient economy, then the more we are diverse, the more we have a diverse range of businesses of different types, the more we have sort of large companies and selling globally and small firms who are more embedded in the local economy, as Kelly has said, that the stronger we'll be. So having a diverse economy is hugely valuable. And of course that goes for who's involved in that economy as well. We know that in corporations and in any walk of life, the more diverse the people involved, the more better the decisions are that result. So greater diversity, I think, really makes economic sense. And so I think it's great that we should be doing all that we can really to promote and celebrate the fantastic achievements and role that women in particular play in creating that diverse economy. It's a great strength, a great asset, and something we should be celebrating.
Kelly, we're seeing a lot more women in leadership. Indeed, within the public sector, we're seeing more women councillors in leadership positions. But there still remains a sizable proportion of women that are unable to access employment opportunities. They may have caring responsibilities, lack of flexible work options. What are the things the Cardiff Capital Region need to be looking at to unlock this potential? And I guess then create a more equal for all employment landscape?
Yeah, well, we're definitely seeing many more women in prominent leadership positions. If you take the Cardiff Capital Region, for example, we've got 2 new female leaders. Councillor Jane Mudd, who's the new leader of Newport City Council, Councillor Philippa Marsden, who's the female leader of Caerphilly County Borough Council, which is great. It's really important. It's really symbolic. But I think, there are still too many women in the labour market who just can't access employment opportunities and unleash their full potential because they've got caring responsibilities. There's a real lack of flexible working options, opportunities that will suit them and their responsibilities and their lifestyles. I think in a lot of the areas that I work in, I still see too few women in, STEM-related subjects, STEM-related industries. And I think, there's a real missed opportunity there, not just in terms of them making up numbers in the labour market, but because of the different skills and perspectives and outlooks that I believe, women do bring to the workplace. And as Jill said, if we're going to be more diverse and respect difference and have some bloody good challenge, then, that absolutely needs to be something that we have and nurture as a necessity. So, yeah, I think for me, it's not just about women in prominent leadership positions, I think anybody can exercise leadership through having a go, and I think we've got to create the conditions for more women to have a go.
The report indicates that regionally we score well on well-being and quality of life. Jill, is that a cause for optimism? What conclusions can we draw from this?
I think it definitely is a cause for optimism. I think having a place that has high levels of well-being, a good quality of life and a fantastic natural environment in particular is again a real strength. It's a real asset for the Cardiff Capital Region that we've got such a fantastic community resource, that we've got such high levels of satisfaction. People like living and working in the Cardiff Capital Region. And I think the data really shows and emphasises that. But it also, I think, shows what we've got in terms of untapped resources, untapped assets and sources of strength. And I think there's some real opportunities with the investment plan and the City Deal's ambitions, really, to perhaps draw more fully on, for example, the fantastic natural environment that we have across our city region with the Brecon Beacons, we've got the coast, we've got so much on which we can draw, on which there are real economic opportunities, I think. But if you place that at the heart, I think, of the strategy, it really does help to build a distinctive sense of place and a strong sense that people, as I say, really like living and working here. And that's a tremendous asset and something we can really use and promote.
Kelly, your vision for the Cardiff Capital Region is for a region where prosperity is shared and wealth and well-being are, I guess, compatible goals. Can you share with us the key findings that you'll be looking to focus on over the next 12 months?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you've just made there, Mark, where well-being and wealth creation can be compatible, because I think, something that often frustrates me is that these two things are seen as mutually exclusive, and I don't think they are, or at least I don't think they have to be. So we're trying to put a lot of focus at the moment. I mean, I've described the housing fund to you, and it would have been easy to sort of jump on the commercial bandwagon and do more high growth housing for profit. Sure, I get that. But we're really trying to tackle the problems that are manifest, that are difficult. It would be easy to kick some of this stuff into the long grass, but it's the right thing for us to do, to intervene where the market isn't working and to try and make a difference. One of the things that I'm really excited about is the prospect of us launching our first challenge fund, which is around local wealth building. So we really want to look at what kinds of conditions do we need to generate in things like the foundational economy to build wealth at a local level, but to retain and to recycle it, to improve local assets and resources, by drawing upon the expertise of local people, by helping to solve some of the big problems that we have across things like land, food and decarbonisation, by thinking about the opportunities in our town centres differently, about our leisure offer, thinking about tourism. I think the role of organisations like RSLs, housing associations, in terms of keeping that pound locally, but allowing us in the public sector as well to think about not just how we procure better solutions and innovation, but how we're much more innovative in our procurement. So we're unlocking gains and benefits just in the process of going about our everyday business. So that challenge fund and having a totally different perspective on how we can solve some of these problems by saying, look, we don't have the answers. We know what the problem is. We got a load of good data. We got a load of people we think we can work with. I think is a really different way of working. And I think we'll have to see much more of this approach in the future. I think the second thing for me, which you'd probably expect me to say in this context, is definitely around skills, talent development, people retention, how we can build and grow that learning and development opportunity. And yes, at the moment, we're doing really well with our graduate programme, but that's kind of at the high end of the spectrum. Is how do we think about all stages on that continuum? So we've started some work around an opportunity for a whole schools programme for the region and how we can coordinate and ensure young people are engaging with inspirational business leaders, with entrepreneurs, with people in their community who have a valuable contribution that they can learn from. Because I think that's a real leveller, particularly for kids from disadvantaged backgrounds that may not engage with some, conventional methods and methodologies, but will sit and talk to somebody and get something inspirational from that. We've got some great opportunities around shared apprenticeship schemes. Again, sort of aligned to our key priority sectors, which isn't just about graduates and doctoral students and postdocs. This is about, people with raw talent and capability in some of the areas that we need to nurture, which I feel particularly passionate about. And I think the other key thing that we'll do as well, because there's going to be a big focus on infrastructure, as I foresee, with a levelling up agenda over the next few years, whether that's road, rail, whether that's air. But digital, I think, again, will make a massive contribution to this. We've just, part of a partnership that secured a 5G bid with DCMS. We're going to try and build upon that now with Welsh Government's leadership, and trying to really make sure that 5G can test capability in perhaps areas that we haven't explored enough, such as precision agriculture, such as local tourism, making sure that we're making a real contribution through tying up foundational industries with those key industries of the future, making sure they can respond to some of the big grand challenges of our time, whether they're industrial or societal. So that's a little flavour. It's not a huge amount of detail because we're developing a lot of these things at the moment. But, hopefully you can take some comfort from the fact that we're trying to develop them in the right ways, in the ways that respond to complex problems. Because I think one thing's for sure, we certainly do not live in easy or straightforward times.
This series has been a fabulous example of collaboration between Cardiff University and the Cardiff Capital Region. Jill, are there any plans for any further collaborations for expanding the work we've started?
Yes, absolutely. I think more broadly, as Kelly's just said, really, that we're living in turbulent times. There's a whole host of challenges that we face as a city region, and so I think it's vital that the university is one of the key players really in the region. It's a big business in its own right, works closely and collaborates with the Cardiff Capital Region. So I think working together is hugely important as we address these big challenges, and we draw upon the expertise that exists within the university where it can help with that. More specifically on this kind of work, I think we've only really started to scratch the surface here. So this is a really important set of initial reports which set out, I think, really the sorts of data, the sorts of indicators that we need, and will be really useful in giving a sort of ongoing health check really of the Cardiff Capital Region. But there's so much more that we can do. So I think we're really looking to see how we can strengthen and take forward this work in a number of ways. So I think certainly perhaps extending the kinds of data and indicators that we include. This is, a fairly sort of partial set of indicators in some respects, and there's much more information that we could really usefully draw together. And thinking of things like the foundational economy. How do we know if the foundational economy is growing and is resilient? So can we find maybe better ways of measuring that? There aren't always easy sort of official statistics that capture some of those sorts of developments, really. Things like the resilience and the financial health of businesses. The data's a little bit patchy there. It would be really useful to maybe get a better sense of where are our businesses vulnerable, where are perhaps some sort of risks that we may be needing to monitor a little bit more closely. So definitely much more that we can do there. And perhaps finally, we've made these reports as interesting as we can. We've used some good graphics, I think, so hopefully they really enliven, I think, the picture of the economy and the region. But I think we could do much more to make that data more accessible. So we're talking about building maybe some software and a visualization tool, really, a kind of a data dashboard, if you like, that can make that data much more real time, much more live, much easier to access. So you can quite quickly, with a click of a button, hopefully, access current information on what's the city region look like on each particular issue, how do the different communities in the Cardiff Capital Region perform in relation to different indicators. So we get a really good, up-to-date picture of the health of the region.
To summarise, if you could fast forward 5 years, you've got that magic wand, Kelly, in terms of all the aspirations of the organisation, but also yourself. What does that look like? What would that ideal picture be?
Well, I think as Jill has just said, sort of key to informing that ideal picture is changing the way that we do things. At the moment, a lot of our measures and metrics are geared up to standard GVA, productivity, private leverage, and they're important because they do, they give us a good barometer in terms of where our region is going. But I think the things that really matter to people are wellness, well-being. Do they like living here? Do they and their families have a good quality of life? Do some of the kids where I come from, feel like there's opportunities for them, that these are genuinely open opportunities, that they could take part in the compound semiconductor cluster, that there is a role that they could contribute to in science and technology, that, people who work in the foundational economy are valued as a core part of our economy. There isn't this hierarchy or this one way of doing things or this, this sort of tendency to want to do what other regions do and to be like those, to feel comfortable in our skin, to feel like we've got enough. And I think for me, going back to the really important point that you made earlier, and I think Jill did, about livability, we sometimes see livability as the byproduct of the business economy. Oh, fantastic, you know, if we get more people here, they'll stay in our hotels, they'll like our food. It's not. The livability is a core part of selling our brand. You know, it's not just the bit that falls out of the bottom. I think it is what we're about as a region. You know, it is our fantastic spaces, our beaches, our mountains, our great natural environment, our brilliant natural resources. And for me, that's as important as the economic impact that we're trying to create.
Kelly, Jill, thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.